Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Marianne Novak, and this is Maharat's 10 Days of Torah, Shavuot edition, day 1. Many of us have been counting the Omer and been getting ready to celebrate Shavuot. And one of the things that has become a signature program in many communities is the Tikkun Leil Shavuot. On Erev Shavuot, all night long until the next morning, people stay up all night learning Torah. All sorts of Torah, all sorts of different programs for all different ages and different times. Getting ready to daven the shacharit davening early in the morning on the first day of Shavuot. And what begs the question is, it's called a tikkun. Tikkun means to fix. Letakein means to fix. And what exactly are we fixing on the night of Shavuot that has become such a very important part of how we celebrate the holiday? I'd like to suggest that there are at least 3 things that are being fixed on Shavuot. The main reason that is given why we stay up all night is a midrashic idea that comes from the Zohar, which is then repeated and by the Magen Avraham, Rav Avraham Abeli Gombiner, who lived in 17th century Poland. And he gives us an idea of why we do this. And he says, it is stated in the Zohar that on Shavuot, the pious former times would stay up all night and engage in Torah study. And the majority of the Torah students have already adopted this practice. And the reason for this, which is based on a simple explanation, is that the children of Israel slept all night before the Torah was given. And the Holy One, blessed be He had to wake them up in the morning to receive the Torah. Consequently, we are required to make amends for this. So this is very understandable. The idea that the Jewish people who had already left Egypt had had this traumatic experience of crossing the Red Sea and saw the greatness of God's power, were now being asked to come and accept the Torah, something that they really didn't have an understanding about. They were exhausted, and they were told to wait 3 days, and they fell asleep, and Moshe Rabbeinu had to come and wake them up. Now, we know what they received, and it seems in our case that if we knew we were going to see the Torah, we probably wouldn't be on the next day. We probably wouldn't have been able to stay asleep at all. So here we are doing this tikkun of fixing the way that our ancestors behaved by staying up all night, reading Torah, getting ready to receive the Torah. And that's one part of what's being fixed of the tikkun. I'd like to suggest that there's another tikkun that's going on. If you notice, the name of the holiday is Zaman Matan Toratenu, the time of the giving of the Torah. It doesn't say that it's Zaman Kabbalat Torah. It's not when we are accepting the Torah, receiving the Torah. It's the giving of the Torah. And it would seem that perhaps there's something else that needs to be fixed. If we look at the very famous Midrash that's brought in Shabbat 88a, it describes how the Jewish people were asked to accept the Torah at Har Sinai. And in this Midrash, God holds Har Sinai over the tops of the heads of the Jewish people and says, basically, you better accept it or else I'm going to drop this mountain on you, and this mountain, this area will now become your graves. Well, I'm a lawyer, and that's certainly not consensual acceptance. That's coercion. And the rabbis were very, very bothered by this. And so if you notice, the holiday again is Zaman Matan Toratenu. When does this actual Kabbalah, our acceptance actually happen? It happens in a very different place. It happens in Persia, as is related to us in Megillat Esther, where the Jewish people say Kimu v'Kiblu, and the Chachamim there say this is the time when the Jewish people decided of their own accord and their own volition to accept the Torah. Now it's interesting that it happened to happen in a place that's not in Israel. And it makes their choice even more important and lends it a greater deal of validity. Because living in Eretz Israel, the home religion or the national religion was Judaism. You could choose to do something else, but that wasn't the norm. The Jewish people in Persia, Judaism wasn't the prevailing religion, it wasn't the prevailing culture. And for them to decide in Galut to actively choose to become Jews and actively observe Torah, that's an acceptance that is without coercion. So that's the second tikkun that's happening. The third tikkun I'd like to suggest is a tikkun for the holiday in and of itself. When we look in the Torah text, the way that we observe Shavuot right now really bears no resemblance to how it's described in the Torah. It is primarily a harvest holiday that requires Kohanim, requires a statement of faith, and it needs to be done in the land of Israel. all these things. We really don't have those elements anymore. And so many historians will say, since the destruction of the Second Temple, since it was a Torah mandated holiday, the Chachamim had to come up with something because they couldn't dump the holiday. I like to suggest something a little bit more nuanced, and that is perhaps the tikkun that's happening here is the way that the holiday was meant to be observed all along. It might have started out as a harvest holiday, but I would like to believe that God, if God has indeed commanded us to follow this holiday forever, it must be that this was what was meant to be all along. And what was that? A holiday to celebrate not only the giving, but the acceptance of the Torah. It seems a little odd that this very, very important and pivotal event in Jewish history had no commemoration, no holiday for it at all to begin with. But that's our chance as well. Now with this third tikkun, we are able to actually continue what Shavuot was truly meant to be, a Torah holiday, even though it has its origins in a harvest holiday. Wishing you all a very Chag Sameach.